I knew something was off the moment I got that call. It wasn't a big deal at first, just another one of those work events Ellen had to attend, but there was something about her voice that struck me wrong. It was always her tone. She had this way of making everything sound casual when I knew it wasn't. "It's just a few days, Mark. No big deal," she said, but I knew better. It had been months of late nights, long weekends, and endless excuses, and now she was off to some work seminar with Alex, the new guy from her department, tagging along. The more she said, the more I felt something in my gut twisting. This wasn't the first time I'd had that feeling over the past few months. I'd noticed her slipping away. Ellen used to be my world, but now she was distant. Her attention, once all mine, was now scattered across texts and calls. And all the while, I couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right. It didn't take long for me to figure out that she'd been spending more and more time with Alex, a guy from her office who seemed to always be there when I wasn't. I tried to ignore it at first. Give her the benefit of the doubt. I figured maybe I was being paranoid, but then one night, after a particularly long day of her working late, I found a message on her phone. It wasn't anything explicit, but it didn't need to be. The casual, friendly tone in Alex's text left a chill in my bones. "See you after work. Same place as last time. Can't wait to see you again." I wasn't a fool. I knew what was going on. The next day, when Ellen mentioned the seminar again, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "You're going with Alex, aren't you?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. She hesitated, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes, a brief flash of guilt, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "What are you talking about, Mark?" she said, feigning confusion. "It's just a seminar with Alex." I pressed, my fists clenched at my sides. "Yes," she sighed, rolling her eyes like it was the most insignificant thing in the world. "He's just my colleague, Mark. We work together. Nothing's going on." But I knew. I could feel it deep inside, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I wasn't an idiot. I wasn't going to stand around and let her pretend everything was fine. "Tell me the truth," I demanded, my voice steady but filled with quiet fury. "You're having an affair with him, aren't you?" Her face fell. She couldn't even look at me. "Mark," she began, but I didn't let her finish. I wasn't going to beg for the truth. I already knew it, but I had to hear her say it. So I kept pushing, kept pressing, waiting for the words I already knew were coming. Her silence was enough of an answer. She wasn't sorry. Not at all. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't going to sit by and let her destroy everything I had worked for, everything we had built together. I couldn't let her walk all over me anymore. The next few days passed in a blur. She still tried to act like everything was fine, but I wasn't buying it. It didn't take long for me to get the confirmation I needed. One evening, after she had left for the seminar, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I followed her, staying a few steps behind, just enough to make sure I wasn't seen. What I found wasn't a seminar, it was a lie. Ellen and Alex weren't attending some boring conference. They were holed up in a hotel room together. I saw them the way they looked at each other, the way Alex touched her like it was normal, like I didn't even exist. That was it. I was done. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in my car, staring at the hotel, letting the anger wash over me. Every ounce of betrayal, every insult, every lie, everything I had tried to ignore it all hit me at once. Ellen had crossed the line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I couldn't bring myself to go home after what I saw. The image of them together, laughing and kissing, replayed over and over in my mind. I wanted to scream, to tear down the walls of that hotel room, but I stayed quiet, locked in my car, staring at the dim lights of the building. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, a mix of rage and disbelief churning in my gut. When I finally pulled myself together enough to drive home, I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew this was no longer just about infidelity. This was about humiliation, my humiliation. The humiliation of a man who had worked hard to build a life, only to have it torn apart by the woman he trusted most. Ellen wasn't just cheating on me. She was flaunting it, rubbing it in my face like it meant nothing. I parked in the driveway and stared at the house we built, the place where we raised our kids, where I thought we were happy. The kids were with their grandparents for the weekend, and it was just me and Ellen, a calm before the storm. I walked in, my footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. Ellen was in the living room, fiddling with her phone, completely unaware of what I had just witnessed. She didn't look up as I approached. Her face had that same practiced fake smile, like she was trying to convince herself everything was okay. "How was the seminar?" I asked, my voice deceptively calm. Ellen looked up, her face lighting up as she launched into the usual spiel. "It was fine. A lot of great people. Very informative. I'm glad I went." She paused, eyes flicking toward me, noticing the look on my face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I said, my voice cold and flat. I was controlling it, barely. I took a slow step closer, my gaze narrowing as I watched her. I needed her to understand the weight of this moment, how every ounce of trust between us had been shattered in one fell swoop. I couldn't stand the lies anymore. "You've been busy, haven't you?" I asked, the words barely escaping my throat. Her face faltered for a second, but she recovered quickly. "Busy? What do you mean?" I didn't give her a chance to deflect. "With Alex. You've been spending all this time with him, going to lunch, late-night work sessions, and let's not even talk about the seminar." Her eyes darted away, and she let out a shaky breath, trying to keep her composure. "Mark, I don't know what you're talking about." "He's just a colleague." "No," I said, cutting her off. "No, he's not, and I'm not a fool. I've seen the texts. I saw you two together. Don't lie to me." Ellen stood frozen for a moment, her face pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was the first time I saw her so vulnerable, and I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. I had nothing left to give her. "I know everything, Ellen," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "You think I don't notice? Think I don't see how you've been looking at him, how you've been sneaking around behind my back? You don't get to do this to me, not to my face." Her eyes welled with tears, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely scared. But it didn't matter. Nothing she could say would undo the damage she'd done. She stood there, wringing her hands, unable to look me in the eye. "I never wanted to hurt you, Mark," she said softly. "I didn't mean for this to happen." I couldn't contain the anger anymore. It was like a dam had broken inside me, flooding my chest with hot, bitter resentment. "You think I care about your excuses?" I snapped. "You didn't think about me, about the kids. You didn't think about anything but yourself." I grabbed her by the arm, the heat of my anger searing through my veins. "You humiliated me, Ellen, and I won't stand for it. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth, that you're nothing but a liar and a cheat." She pulled away, eyes wide with shock. "Mark, please don't do this. Don't ruin everything." But I couldn't stop myself. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me and pretend everything was fine. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I turned and walked toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. "I don't want to see you right now," I said, my voice hard. "Stay here, do whatever you want, but you're not coming with me." I didn't care about the house or the life we built anymore. All I cared about was making sure she knew what it felt like to lose everything, just like she made me feel. As I left, I heard her voice break. "Mark, please don't leave me. Please, I'm sorry." But it was too late for apologies. The next few hours felt like a blur, but one thing was clear. I couldn't go on pretending everything was fine. Not anymore. Ellen's apology, Her pleading it all seemed so hollow. I tried to numb the rage, but it gnawed at me, relentless. I didn't even know what I was supposed to do next. Go back to her, pretend to be happy for the kids? I'd never been more alone, even in a room full of people. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I had spent years working to build a family, a life, and she had torn it apart without a second thought. Now I had to take control. I wasn't just going to let her humiliate me, not after everything. She could leave if she wanted, but she wouldn't do it without consequences. I spent the rest of the evening pacing, waiting for the inevitable storm to hit. When the phone rang, I picked it up without thinking twice. It was Ellen's assistant, reminding me about the company Christmas party the next night. Ellen was already planning to go, of course, still pretending like nothing was wrong, still pretending like this was all just some mistake. She sounded excited, her voice light and carefree, completely unaware of the fire burning inside me. I didn't know what I expected to happen at that party. I hadn't planned for it to go the way it did, but deep down, I knew this was where it would all come to a head. This was where she would have to face the truth, face the consequences of what she had done. I put on my suit and tie, the same way I had done every year for that damn party, but this time felt different. I wasn't the same man I had been the year before. This time, I was walking into that party with a purpose. The air was thick with tension as I entered the venue, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filling the room. Ellen was already there, standing near the bar, her laughter ringing out as she chatted with a group of colleagues. She looked stunning, as always, but all I could see was the betrayal etched into her smile. I made my way through the crowd, my eyes locked on her. She hadn't noticed me yet, too engrossed in her conversation. Alex was there too, standing a little too close to her, his hand brushing against her arm as he laughed at something she said. The sight made my blood boil, but I kept my composure. This wasn't the time for a scene, not yet. As I approached, Ellen finally noticed me. Her smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered, plastering on that fake, practiced grin she'd been using for months. "Mark, I didn't think you'd make it," she said, her voice dripping with false enthusiasm. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, my tone icy. I could see the unease in her eyes, the way she shifted slightly, putting a little more distance between herself and Alex. Good. Let her squirm. The night dragged on, the tension between us growing thicker with each passing minute. Ellen tried to keep up the charade, introducing me to her colleagues, laughing at jokes, pretending everything was fine. But I could see the cracks in her facade, the way her eyes darted nervously toward me whenever she thought I wasn't looking. Finally, the moment I'd been waiting for arrived. The CEO of Ellen's company took the stage to give his annual speech, thanking everyone for their hard work and dedication. As he wrapped up, he opened the floor for anyone who wanted to say a few words. Without hesitation, I stepped forward. Ellen's eyes widened in panic as I took the microphone. "Mark, what are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I ignored her, turning to face the crowd. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady and strong. "I'm sure most of you know me as Ellen's husband. But tonight, I'm here to set the record straight." The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I could feel Ellen's panic radiating off her, but I didn't care. This was my moment. For the past few months, I've been living a lie. My wife, the woman I trusted more than anyone in this world, has been having an affair with one of her colleagues. Gasps echoed through the room, and I could see the color drain from Ellen's face. Alex, standing a few feet away, looked like he wanted to disappear. I continued, my voice rising with each word. She thought she could hide it, that she could keep lying to me, to all of you. But I'm done pretending. I'm done letting her humiliate me, letting her destroy everything we built together. I turned to Ellen, my eyes locking onto hers. "You made your choice, Ellen. Now you get to live with the consequences." The room erupted into chaos. Whispers and murmurs filled the air as people turned to each other, trying to process what had just happened. Ellen stood frozen, her face pale, her hands trembling. Alex quickly slipped away, disappearing into the crowd. I handed the microphone back to the CEO, who looked stunned but didn't say a word. Without another glance at Ellen, I turned and walked out of the room, my head held high. The weight that had been pressing down on me for months was finally gone. I had taken back my dignity, my self-respect. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was over. The lies, the betrayal, the humiliation, it was all behind me now. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own life. Ellen could keep the house, the money, the life we had built together. None of it mattered anymore. What mattered was that I had stood up for myself, that I had refused to let her destroy me. And as I walked away from that party, I knew one thing for certain: I was going to be just fine. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. Ellen tried to reach out, leaving voicemails and texts filled with apologies and pleas for forgiveness. But I didn't respond. I had said everything I needed to say at that party. The ball was in her court now, and I wasn't going to play her game anymore. I moved out of the house temporarily, staying with a close friend while I figured out my next steps. The kids were still with their grandparents, and I knew I'd have to explain everything to them eventually. But for now, I needed time to process, to heal, and to plan. The fallout from the party was swift and brutal. Ellen's affair became the talk of her office, and it wasn't long before HR got involved. Alex was transferred to another department, but the damage to his reputation was already done. Ellen, on the other hand, faced the full brunt of the consequences. Her colleagues, many of whom had admired her, now looked at her with a mix of pity and disdain. The woman who had once been a rising star in the company was now a pariah. I didn't take any pleasure in her suffering, but I also didn't feel guilty. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. As for me, I focused on rebuilding my life. I started seeing a therapist to work through the anger and betrayal, and I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the routine and the sense of accomplishment it brought. A few weeks after the party, I received a letter from Ellen's lawyer. She wanted a divorce. I wasn't surprised. In fact, I had been expecting it. I hired my own lawyer and began the process of untangling our lives. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The hardest part was telling the kids. They were old enough to understand what was happening, but that didn't make it any easier. We sat them down one evening and explained that Mommy and Daddy were going to live apart from now on. They cried, and so did we. But we assured them that we both loved them and that this wasn't their fault. It was a painful conversation, but it was also a necessary one. As the months passed, I began to find a new sense of normalcy. I moved into a smaller house, one that felt more like a fresh start than a reminder of the past. I reconnected with old friends and even started dating again, though I took things slow. I wasn't ready to fully trust someone again, but I was open to the possibility. Ellen and I settled into a co-parenting routine, putting aside our differences for the sake of the kids. It wasn't always easy, but we managed. She had moved out of the house and into an apartment, and while she tried to rebuild her life, I could see the toll the affair had taken on her. She had lost more than just her marriage. She had lost a part of herself. One evening, as I was putting the kids to bed, my youngest asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Daddy, do you still love Mommy?" I paused, unsure of how to answer. "I'll always care about your mom," I said carefully. But sometimes, when people hurt each other, it's hard to love them the same way. What's important is that we both love you and your sister very much. She seemed satisfied with that answer, and as I tucked her in, I felt a sense of peace. The road ahead was still long, and there would be challenges, but I knew I was on the right path. As I walked out of the room, I glanced at a photo on the wall, a picture of our family from happier times. I felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of resolve. That chapter of my life was over, but a new one was beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. Ellen had tried to humiliate me, to break me, but in the end, she had only made me stronger. I had faced the storm head on, and I had come out the other side. And as I stood there, looking at that photo, I knew one thing for certain: I was going to be just fine. Months turned into a year, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. The divorce was finalized, and while it wasn't amicable, it was civil. Ellen and I had reached a point where we could communicate without bitterness, even if the wounds were still there, just beneath the surface. The kids adjusted to the new normal, splitting their time between our two homes. They were resilient, as kids often are, and while they missed the days when we were all under one roof, they seemed to understand that this was the way things had to be. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the structure and purpose it provided. I even started a side project, a blog where I wrote about my experiences, not just with the divorce, but with life in general. It started as a way to process my own emotions, but it quickly gained traction. People reached out, sharing their own stories of betrayal, heartbreak, and resilience. It was humbling to realize that my pain had resonated with so many others, and it gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. Ellen, on the other hand, seemed to struggle more openly. Her career never fully recovered from the fallout of the affair. She was passed over for promotions, and the once bright future she had at her company seemed to dim. She tried to rebuild her life, dating here and there, but nothing seemed to stick. I didn't take pleasure in her struggles, but I also didn't feel responsible for them. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. One evening, as I was scrolling through my blog comments, I came across a message that stopped me in my tracks. It was from Alex. He had reached out to apologize, not just for what he had done, but for the pain he had caused. He admitted that he had been selfish and reckless, and that he regretted the way things had unfolded. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just wanted me to know that he was sorry. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. Part of me wanted to delete the message and forget it ever existed. But another part of me recognized the courage it took for him to reach out. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to process what I was feeling. Anger, yes, but also a strange sense of closure. His apology didn't erase what had happened, but it did help me let go of some of the bitterness I'd been carrying. A few weeks later, I ran into Ellen at a school event for the kids. We exchanged polite small talk, but there was an awkwardness between us that hadn't been there before. As we stood there, watching our daughter perform in a school play, she turned to me and said something I hadn't expected. "I'm sorry, Mark," she said quietly, "for everything." I looked at her, surprised. This wasn't the rehearsed apology she had given me in the past. This felt raw, genuine. I nodded, not sure how to respond. "Thank you," I said finally. "That means a lot." We didn't say much else after that, but something shifted between us. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step toward healing. We were both trying to move forward, in our own ways. As time went on, I found myself opening up to the idea of love again. I started dating a woman named Claire, who had her own share of scars, but approached life with a kind of optimism that was contagious. She didn't try to fix me or fill the void Ellen had left. Instead, she encouraged me to keep growing, to keep healing. It was refreshing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly living, not just surviving. Ellen, too, seemed to find a measure of peace. She started therapy and began to confront the choices she had made. She even reached out to the kids more, making an effort to be present in their lives in a way she hadn't been before. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my new home, watching the sunset, I realized how far I had come. The anger, the betrayal, the humiliation, it had all shaped me, but it didn't define me. I had taken control of my life, and in doing so, I had found a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I was okay with that. I had learned that life wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about how you responded to it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I smiled. The past was behind me, and the future was wide open, and whatever came next, I was ready for it. We value your opinion in comment section. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.